Welcome to the Just My MomSense podcast. I'm not an expert, I'm just trying to figure out parenting and in turn myself while sharing things I've learned with all of you. Hello and welcome back to Just My MomSense. I'm Jen, and today, in honor of Sensory Processing Awareness Month, I want to talk about something that kind of started a lot of this journey for me, and that is sensory processing differences in kids. So many families are navigating sensory challenges, and sometimes they may not even realize it. If you've ever wondered why your child may react to a tag on their shirt, certain textures, certain foods, maybe a certain smell in a room, you're not alone, and we're going to talk about all of it. I'm taking today to kind of share a mix of my own personal stories and, of course, sharing some tips and resources that I've gathered along the way. First, what is sensory processing? What is that? And I know I did an episode about our senses previously, so if you haven't checked out the earlier podcast episodes, be sure to go back and listen to that one. But sensory processing is how our brains interpret information from our senses. So, of course, there's touch, taste, sound, sight. There's also movement, body awareness, all of that input that we are getting. Some kids and adults, their brains can process this information smoothly. For my kids, not so much. Sensory processing differences can show up in a few ways. Some kids are over-responsive, meaning certain sensations can feel overwhelming or even painful to them. Others are under-responsive, and they may seek extra input in order to feel regulated. I started the Just My MomSense blog back in 2018, which is crazy because time flies by way too fast. But at that point, my son was already in speech therapy, and I started seeing some signs of what I would later realize was sensory processing difficulties. And it's one of those things where when you see maybe one of them happening, or even two, you're kind of like, oh, well, maybe that's just them, or that's nothing, or other kids do that too, or whatever it is. You kind of brush it off in this. There's not more to the story with it. It's just a one-off thing. But as you start gathering a few of those and more, and putting the puzzle together, the bigger picture kind of becomes more clear. So looking back at the beginning of my blogs, I did have one called When is it empathy and when is it sensory? This was an exact question I asked our amazing speech therapist back in the spring of 2017. So my daughter was a few months old at the time, and anytime we were in the car, and if she would start to cry, like babies do in the car, my son would start to cry. And not a regular cry, but we need to help her. And he would beg us to help her. And he would want to get out of this space we were in. At first, of course, we did think it was empathy. Like, oh my goodness, look how sweet. He's sad because she's sad. And of course, that's part of it. There is a part of it that was a little bit of empathy. But a lot of it was the fact that he was completely overwhelmed being strapped in his car seat in the car with this really loud sound, seeing, for him, someone suffering. He started to do the same with my niece if she would get upset, or if we were out with friends and a friend would get upset, he would look to try to go home or get out of the space he was in. So of course I did what most parents do, which isn't always recommended, but we all do it. And I started to Google. And as I was Googling, I realized that maybe there was more to the story here. And as time went on, I started to collect more and more pieces. We're in October, and it was this time of year where he was Woody from Toy Story for Halloween, and so we had a Woody costume, and the back of it Velcroed shut. And this was the first time he really showed signs of being bothered by clothing. He absolutely hated the sound of the Velcro that as he walked, he could kind of hear it, and he hated the feel of it. He was trying to rip it off lots. He was not happy with that Velcro. And to this day, he is now 11, he cuts tags out of all of his clothing. He just cannot stand that feeling and the sound and all of it. That same year, we also did a drive-through Christmas light experience. And again, super unhappy, very overwhelmed. We thought he would love it. He loves Christmas. He loves Christmas lights. This was just way too much. Everything was big and brighter and music was playing, and I'm sure everything looked a little bit scary outside the window to him. He was only 3 at the time. As I started reading more about sensory processing, my gut, my mom sense, was once again thinking I needed to get an evaluation for him, similar to how we had gotten one for him for speech. Luckily, I was able to get an evaluation before the holidays, before the new year, and I started making notes for the evaluator regarding my concerns, and when I was done, I had over 2 pages of notes once I really sat down and thought about everything. Not long after that evaluation, it was probably right after the new year, we were approved for occupational therapy, which was great. Then at that point, he started doing occupational therapy and speech therapy. So we were on the right path for getting him the resources he needed at the time. My daughter has her own sensory challenges, and they're different than my son's. There have been some overlapping. Neither one are big fans of really loud noises. However, they themselves can be very loud, and I chalk that up to them matching the volume of how they're hearing the world. And for my daughter, I remember in pre-K, when she was going to school, she would get very particular about her socks. And at first I thought, I kind of shook that off because to this point we hadn't seen too much from her in terms of sensory challenges. And I thought she just liked certain socks and what they looked like or whatever it was. But she started really focusing on the seam of the sock at the toe, and it really started to affect her every day and started to bother her. And she noticed when socks felt different, or maybe she had 2 white socks, but they weren't the exact same white sock. So she would know if one was a little thicker and one was a little thinner. And one day we got in the car, we were trying to get to school. We were still in the driveway though. And she just broke down and saying, "I'm so uncomfortable." And that's when my light bulb went off of, okay, this is a bigger deal than she's just being picky about her socks. Both of them have very picky eating habits, and they're different picky eating habits because why would they be the same, right? So certain textures of foods, one might love it, one might hate it. And to that, I have also thought more about picky eating over time. I'm sure that some days in the cafeteria it's a struggle because it's so loud and so noisy and the lights are weird and the smells are weird. And when we're away on vacation, I know that they're probably not eating the best they can. And as long as they're eating, I'm happy because I know we're in a different environment. There's a lot of excitement. There's some nervous energy. There's crowds, there's different people around them eating. There's so many things that factor into it that I am sure is affecting them and what they're able to do in those moments. Something else that was really rough for my son when he was little was anytime happy birthday was being sung, whether to him or to someone else in the room. There were many times he had to leave because the song itself, the crowd of people singing it, it was all way too much for him. I think what we always tried to do with both of them is listen to them as people and recognize what they need, what their bodies need, what might be overwhelming when they do need to be pushed a little bit, when they don't need to be pushed, and navigating all of that, which is not easy to do. Over the years and over time, I learned more about sensory items, sensory activities, sensory diets, and all of these things are tools that I will continue, and sometimes when we're getting too caught up in the day-to-day, I go back to. The kids both have sensory buckets full of items that may calm them. It could be lavender oil, peppermint oil, it might be fidgets, it might be some squishy toys, maybe some headphones, a sound machine. They have that going. They also have weighted blankets that can help calm them. Sensory diets are actually something I just did a blog on yesterday, and that's just activities throughout the day that can help regulate your child. Maybe that's making time for jumping on a trampoline or doing some bear walks. Maybe it's time for a lavender bubble bath or playing with Play-Doh. Maybe it's just quiet time with a weighted blanket and some music. Whatever it is that your child may need at that time, and those needs will change throughout the day, that's what you kind of form the sensory diet around. Again, regulation is key, and those needs go up and down throughout the day, but it's all really helpful tools. I think back in the day, before I was a parent, and I always loved kids, but you would see kids out in the stores or maybe at a theme park having complete meltdowns. And I think all of us at one time or another have had the thought of like, ooh, man, that kid. And what I have realized since being a parent is, well, no, that kid's probably really struggling. They must be super overwhelmed by this theme park and the crowds and the noise, or this department store with the fluorescent lights and the weird smells of perfume. And they're probably just having such a hard day. So sensory processing isn't about fixing a behavior or punishing the child for having a hard time. It's about understanding and supporting what their brains are doing and what their bodies need in that moment. And again, I know I kind of focus on kids here as I am talking from a parent's point of view, but this is for people of all ages. People of all ages have sensory processing difficulties and challenges, and we all need to be able to support one another and find support for ourselves for whatever we need throughout the day as well. Kids are experiencing the world for the first time, as we are, and there's so much happening. And there's so much with technology. There's so many differences at school from when we were kids, and they have smart boards and they are playing different games at gym and recess. There's so much going on in their world, and it can all be really overwhelming or confusing for anybody, but especially for those that have sensory processing challenges. I know I'm kind of giving a general overview right now of sensory processing. On my website, I share a lot of blogs that are a little more topic specific, and those will sometimes include links to YouTube videos or books or any kind of sensory toys that I have found that have helped me along the way, and I usually link them in my blog. But for the purposes of this podcast, I'm trying to keep it as an overview and not as specific, but also trying to raise awareness about sensory processing. As a parent, you know your child best. You can pick up on the cues that no one else can. You can be their biggest advocate in school, out of school, and just keep being that safe place for them. On the These are a few of my favorite things page on my site. I have items for sensory bins. I have links to sensory swings. It's not the exact sensory swing we have, which my kids are obsessed with, but it's similar ones. Weighted blankets, oils. Also, something that was big for me, especially in the beginning, were books. So I have a link for The Out of Sync Child, Recognizing and Coping with Sensory Processing Disorder. Also, Raising a Sensory Smart Child, the definitive handbook for helping your child with sensory processing issues. And I also have another book on there called Poppy and the Overactive Amygdala. And that book is geared more towards kids, and it's something you can read with your child. And it does center more around ADHD and how brains are wired. But there's so much crossover for sensory processing and ADHD, sensory processing and autism, and other neurodiversities. So I feel like kids can relate to it no matter who they are. Before we wrap up, I do want to say that if you want to learn more about sensory processing, please check out my page or connect with me on Instagram or Facebook at Just My MomSense, or maybe TikTok. And although I am not a therapist or a doctor or a teacher, I am just a mom, I would be happy to talk through it with you or maybe try to help you find some resources. Just remember to observe your child, what seems to calm them, what seems to overwhelm them. Make sure you're validating when they are triggered, whether their reaction is tears or frustration. And any support you can provide is helpful. So again, those sensory buckets or routines. My goodness, my kids are huge on routines, so we are big fans of that. Any kind of strategy that will help them can make such a huge difference. Sensory processing awareness is about curiosity, empathy, and connection, because when we can just stop and listen to our kids and be able to support them in the best way we can, they can do so much more in this crazy world. Next week, we're going to be back with another fantastic guest. I'm so excited because after the summer hiatus, this will be my first guest coming back. So I'm really looking forward to that episode. Thank you for listening today, and I'll talk to you next week. Thank you for listening to the Just My MomSense podcast. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Just My MomSense, and visit justmymomsense.com for past vlogs and a few of my favorite things. Music for this podcast was produced by Matt Harvey.